I had a woman say to me, I think what you're doing is really lovely, but you are never going to be able to fund it. And I was like, why? Because I was thinking this should be easy to fund, but she was right.
So it's been a while since I've interviewed someone from the nonprofit world. I think we've had 3 or 4 people guest on the podcast, and there's a lot of great things happening everywhere, especially in the nonprofit world. And one sort of stat that was given to me was the fact that there are 1.3 billion people globally that are disabled. And that number just was staggering to me because I just wasn't prepared for it. But what's even crazier is, by and large, that group of people are largely invisible to most people that are going about their daily lives. And by now you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with building relationships with strategic partners as you read the title? Don't worry, you're on the right episode. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing Kim Kargbo, President and CEO at Accessible Hope International. And we're going to dive into the topic of making your organization visible to strategic partners. So welcome to the show, Kim.
Thank you. Thanks, Lee. It's good to be here.
Yeah, so I'm excited about this conversation. I'm really excited about what you guys are doing there. And I wanted to first just have you tell us about Accessible Hope International and a little bit about yourself and what you guys have been up to.
Sure. Well, Accessible Hope International is a nonprofit. As you said, we're relatively small, even in the nonprofit space, not a huge nonprofit like, World Vision or, United Way or something like that, not that big. But we, and part of that is that we're not super old. So about 16 years, going on 16 years now, since we were founded. And also because we serve a population that's not sort of the trendy, popular population to serve in the nonprofit space, particularly internationally. And so that's sort of a layup to who we are. And let me tell you a little bit about how we got to this space. So our program started in Sierra Leone, West Africa. That was where we originally started our work. And it was among women with disabilities exclusively. That program has grown. We continue to have a relationship in Sierra Leone with the program that serves women with disabilities. It's called Women of Hope on the ground. And but since then, the whole organization has evolved and changed, and we now do a lot more that's global. So we started out for about the first 9 or 10 years just working in Sierra Leone with women with disabilities, and then over the past 6 years or so have been expanded globally to work with other small local grassroots nonprofits on the ground in Africa, primarily, who are serving people with disabilities, particularly those that are even more vulnerable than the average person with a disability. So typically that would be women and children. Our other 2 programs that we have long-term partnerships with are schools for kids with disabilities. One is also in Sierra Leone, in a different part of the country than our other program. And then one is in Tanzania. Both of those are schools that serve children and young adults with disabilities with a variety of services. So one of the characteristics that we require in a long-term partnership is holistic services. So not just dealing with one particular thing. So in the disability world, that might look like, sort of wheelchair distribution, for example, or assistive aid devices distribution, things like that. And that would not necessarily be something we wouldn't do, but it would be in the context of dealing with the whole person, as opposed to seeing them as just their disability or with one particular need. And so all of our programming is, and the people that the organizations that we partner with really are designed to be very holistic. And then in addition to that, we do a lot of training around the world. And this is not just in Africa, this is really globally, helping to do worldview shifts around disability. So you mentioned that people with disabilities are a population that's often hidden. In fact, in talking with other nonprofit leaders, when I start talking about disability, people will often say, this is like the number one comment that I get. Well, we just don't really have very many people with disabilities in where we work. And, to which I kind of usually chuckle a little bit, Riley, and say, no, but you do, you just don't see them. And that's really one of the big issues that people with disabilities face globally, but particularly in the global South, where the worldview and the beliefs and attitudes about people with disabilities are really typically quite harmful to them, where they're viewed as either cursed by God and therefore, need to be separated from, so that that curse isn't also somehow affecting you in your life.
Yeah.
Or that they're maybe demonic. And so, nobody really wants to have a demon as a friend, right?
Right.
And so if that's how you believe and you think it's true, it makes sense that you would separate yourself from that person. Or that they're just not really a full human, right? That they're just sort of a half human. And so because of those very common beliefs about disability and people with disabilities, whether that was that they were born with a disability or they acquired a disability later, it really doesn't matter. That really results in a lot of ostracization and marginalization of people with disabilities, to the point that oftentimes people with disabilities are literally hidden away, like not just that they're sort of invisible by default because people aren't noticing them, but that they literally are put away so that people can't see them. And then, along with that comes a lot of other sort of abuse and neglect issues as well. And so part of what our organization does is to really try to shift the attitudes and belief systems around disability to give people a new understanding of people with disabilities, that people with disabilities also have inherent value, that they are human beings, just like all the rest of us, that have specific challenges, but also have a lot of gifts and potential to bring to bear to our community and society. And then through that new understanding, to then start to think, what are the steps that we need to take to be more inclusive as a society?
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for that. That's a great background. It's a lot to kind of take in because, there's so many different things that come to mind. I'm thinking about the complexities of managing care. Where does that start and stop? Because if you're doing that holistically, especially in countries that have infrastructure issues and governance issues, you could run into kind of starting to take care of a whole village.
Yes.
You could really outweigh the limits of your ability and funding
easily.
So seems like that's a tall order to go into really the most hurting of people in a situation that's already probably really hurting, and try to help them. So it's amazing work that you guys are doing.
Yeah, it is. It is very challenging work, as you have alluded to, and there are many complexities. So it does. It keeps us on our toes because I think if we were just distribution for assistive devices and wheelchairs, that would, in a lot of ways, be so much easier, right? Because it's pretty straightforward. It's very tangible, and it sort of has an endpoint, like once a certain number of people get a device, you're kind of done. But this is more of a real long-term commitment of walking alongside people with disabilities over a really long period of time, and really sort of speaking into their life in various different ways, including with training for themselves, training, skills development, economic development kinds of things, support, advocacy for injustice. A lot of times people with disabilities are evicted from their room or home, wherever they are living, unjustly, just because people don't want them there. And so advocating for things like that, where they'll go to the hospital with a medical need and our people won't see them, doctors and nurses refuse to see them. And so there's a lot of advocacy that needs to happen as well. So just really coming alongside people with disabilities and their families in ways that are very, as I said, holistic, and addressing sort of the multifaceted needs that they have as a person. And really what we have found is, and then along with the community education piece too, right? So that people's attitudes start to shift. But what we've really found is that, particularly with our adults, like the women with disabilities that we have, our largest program in Sierra Leone, as the women themselves have started to rethink who they are and what their value is and their purpose for being here, they start to act differently. And that starts to make people pause and think, wait a minute, this person that I thought was cursed by God and not valuable or not even a human is suddenly contributing meaningfully to our society. I don't understand, why is that happening? And so it makes them have to question their own beliefs. And so as the women have really started to take on sort of a new identity, really, in who they are, it started to shift the way people around them think and see them as well.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Does that shift take a long time typically, or
Yes.
do you see it happening quickly?
No, a long time.
No,
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, you can see some incremental shifts that are fairly quick, where like, for example, a lot of the women in our program go through a particular training we have called transformation training. It's quite an extensive period of time, 16 weeks, where they go for a whole day once a week to training. And these are women that have never gone to school a day in their life, right? Never. So the idea of sitting, for a whole day, and it's very interactive. So it's not just sort of sit, but really just being in a sitting space for a whole day when they're used to being on a farm or, in some very sort of high labor capacity, just for daily life, and learning with a group of women, just like them, is just sort of mind bending for them, right? Because that's just never been something that was part of their experience. And initially they come in thinking, I don't know why I'm here, because I've never went to school, so I'm not going to be able to learn, right? And through the very highly interactive, highly engaging course that really touches on all different aspects of their life, emotional, physical, social, spiritual, all different kinds of things. As all of those things start to be discussed in their group and they participate in activities, they realize, wait, I am learning stuff. And we've actually had women in those classes who've literally multiple times have literally saved the life of people in their community through simple preventative measures or simple treatment of diseases that are very common and very not easily solved because they're complex, but that, having a very easy treatment can really make the difference of life or death in a situation where there's not really much medical care. And so that has happened multiple times, which that will be sort of a sudden change of how people view them, where they went from sort of this outcast, sidelined person in their village to sort of the local hero, who just saved the life of this kid through simple measures like rehydration solution, And so those kinds of things do kind of result in a pretty sudden shift, at least initially, and then it takes time for people to really internalize shifts like that and begin to see the person as a different person. But those are often a starting point when women start sharing with others what they've learned.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
As we are shifting our conversation to how to build relationships with strategic partners, one step that I want to take before we get there is kind of this question about, how people see your organization, like just individuals, right? People don't know that your organization exists. How do they find you, and what do they typically think that you do when they initially get to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'll answer the first one first. How do people typically find us? I would say word of mouth, and then maybe online, right? If they're sort of Googling, disability work in Africa or something like that, we might come up in something like that. There's not a lot of disability specific nonprofits that are serving in Africa specifically. So there are a few, but there's not a ton. So, we're going to be in the first page or two of the Google search. So I think those are some of the ways, word of mouth and, through different speaking opportunities or conferences, things like that. And then, how do people see us? Well, I haven't actually asked that, but based on this feedback that I've gotten, I would say, initially, when people think disability, nonprofit, sort of that sort of thing, especially internationally, they think of things like distribution of wheelchairs and crutches and, white canes for the blind, things like that. So typically people think that's what we do, is provision of very specific disability aids for those with disabilities, which is actually not at all what we do. And so that's where we can start to have the conversation about that a person is a person and that they have very complex needs, some of them as a result of their disability, but typically not as a direct result of their disability. Typically, their needs are going to be more an indirect result of the attitudes of people about their disability. So their biggest needs and problems are a lot more to do with how people view them than they are with the lack of infrastructure or support or resources available to them, although those definitely are big needs. But their biggest barriers are really the attitudes of other people. So okay, I think that's one of the misconceptions. So.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. And the base that you're serving is probably impoverished because they're like we talked about these issues. So they probably can't pay directly for any services that you offer, and finding funding is probably going to be tricky.
Yes.
So that would naturally take us to strategic partners. In that, in order for you guys to exist, you're going to need to partner with other people, organizations of the like. Yes. To have caught your vision and see the change that needs to happen. Kind of walk me through your approach to finding and working with strategic partners, and especially since your organization is very much invisible.
Yeah. I'll give you one story that I think illustrates perfectly what you just said. When we first started Accessible Hope, this has been, 15, 16 years ago now. I had a woman say to me, I think what you're doing is really lovely, but you are never going to be able to fund it. And I was like, why? Because I was thinking, these are very vulnerable people. This should be easy to fund, right? Like there's high need. People are compassionate people, generally speaking. And she said, because they're not cute kids. And I was like, okay. And I kind of wanted to sort of push back on that and be like, people aren't that petty, are they? But she was right. So, unfortunately, because I think, things like, World Vision or Compassion International, larger organizations that do serve sort of children, right, all over the world, super cute kids, right? Like they're just like they're adorable. And people just want to do something, like they just are cute and they kind of tug your heartstrings. Disfigured women, not so much, right? Like that's maybe not going to be people's idea of beauty. And we give toward what our hearts are moved toward, right? And so, that's the whole thing about marketing and promotion anyway, is like get people's heart to get involved, like make them feel something, right? And that will then the funds will follow. And so, while I hated what that woman said and wanted it to not be true, over the years, I realized that it was more true than I wished it was. So I think that sort of speaks into a little bit what you're talking about that there's maybe some challenges in.
Yeah, sounds like there's additional challenges.
Yeah. And even, with the children with disabilities, because we have, 2 schools that we also, that are part of our partnerships. And even with that, again, not to say they're not cute, but they're not sort of the society's idea of beauty, right? And so if they're very disfigured or whatever, then there's sort of this, people have to kind of get over a hump to see that child as beautiful, or as we all have our internal biases, right? And so we have to kind of overcome those to see, like, this is a person that may not be like what I would consider cute, right? Whatever that is. But has needs and is valuable and is worth helping and reaching out to, and that their family has needs as a result of their disability as well. And the infrastructure not being there makes their needs all the greater, right? And so I think, going back to now your question about partnerships, what we really like to do is to almost be subversive. We do a lot of work with a lot of conferences with we're a faith-based organization. So we are at conferences a lot with other faith-based organizations, and really just like asking those organizations, whatever it is they do, right? Whether it's, relief and development, in disaster zones, or WASH, like, water and sanitation, or, even if it's like planting churches or whatever their particular aspect is, of service, to ask them, in the population that you serve, how many of those, like 16% of the world has a disability, every population around the globe, like every population, every country that you go to, at least 16% of those people have a disability. Now, in conflict zones or post-conflict zones, that's even higher because of the conflicts. Right. But on the regular, it's 16%. If you were to survey your entire sort of target population of whatever your organization serves, how many people within your specific target organization or target population have a disability? And this is where I get the response, well, we don't really have very many people with disabilities in our area where we're working, right? To which I reply, yes, you do. They're just hidden. And so what we really have been working more recently in is to work alongside other organizations that are doing other things and helping them catch a vision for why people with disabilities need to be intentionally included into whatever their service provision is. So, if you are an organization that drills wells in Africa, for example, and clean water is your thing, right? And you're all about access to clean water. That's amazing. Are you keeping in your mind that there are people with disabilities within that village or wherever it is that you're drilling that well? Are you making sure that the well is accessible to people with disabilities? Are you making sure that people with disabilities are actually accessing water, or are people keeping them, like they don't want them in their well? Like usually wells have like an enclosure around them in these rural villages. They don't want them in there because they consider them to be dirty. And so they're like, well, we just got this new clean water. We don't want dirty people in there. Are people with disabilities allowed into the well enclosure to get water? Is the pump or whatever the mechanism is for getting the water accessible to people with disabilities? So trying to help other organizations think through their strategy and ask the question, are we really serving people with disabilities? Maybe their organization provides education for children in rural areas where there's maybe not a very good access to education. That's definitely needed. Are you also thinking about children with disabilities in your area and finding ways to make sure that they also are able to access that education? So part of what we do is consulting with other organizations to help them ask these questions, to evaluate their own target population and their service provision space, and make sure that people with disabilities are actually included in that. And if they're not, to ask the question why, right? And then to start being curious about what might be happening in that community that is preventing people with disabilities from accessing those services.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So you're trying to find other organizations that you can integrate with, or that you may be aligned with, be it, probably the similar base of people you're going after, and informing them. So you said consulting. I thought that was such an interesting way to think about it. I mean, that's what you're doing, but it's interesting from a business standpoint. If we're thinking about strategic partnerships, there are people that are serving our same prospect base, and we could educate them on the need and benefit of the type of solution that we're providing that integrates with theirs. Maybe I know I'm thinking about myself as a content marketing agency, working with other types of agencies that are very similar, like SEO agencies and stuff like that, where we're going after a similar customer base, but there's a crossover in terms of adding impact.
Yeah.
And I like that a lot, because it's not just going to an organization and asking for help, and putting a burden on them, but it's going there, adding value.
Yeah. And one of the things that we've worked really hard over the last, probably 6-7 years, is to develop a lot of resources, and they're all open source resources that do train leaders, right? So we can talk with. So let's say we'll continue on with the conversation around a WASH, right? A well digging organization. That if they were like, you know what, you're right. Like, we don't think we have people with disabilities accessing our wells, or we have not noticed people with disabilities in our community. And why would that be? And so if they start to become curious, then what we have next is we have offerings that we can provide to them of training and curriculum and resources that will help train their leadership. And then hopefully that would trickle down, that they would continue to pass that along to their, field people and things like that. That would begin to help them just start thinking differently about disability and to open their eyes a little bit to who might be being excluded from our services unintentionally, right? Not intentionally for sure, but who might not be accessing our services for reasons that are maybe unknown to us, that we might need to ask more questions about and try to be more intentional about including. And so we have a lot of those resources, and we also provide training for organizations like that for their leadership, and then provide them with resources that they can take the training on down to the rest of their staff.
Yeah, that's great. So on the ground level, that makes a lot of sense. In terms of funding, how do you build relationships or partnerships there?
Yeah. So that's harder. And so I think funding is the hardest part of this job, hands down.
Oh, yeah.
And I've already told you the story of the gal that said why. And, and I think there's something to that. I don't think that's the whole sole reason for sure. But most of our funding comes from just individual donors, right? And so it's a lot of just trying to continue to push those circles out and include more people in the communications, in understanding what we do and why we do what we do. And particularly sort of making sure that people who really already have some sort of a passion around disability, maybe they themselves have been affected by disability through their own life, or a family member, child, parent, brother, sister, whoever. And so their life has been directly affected by disability, and they understand that there's so many complexities. And so, those might be some people that we would want to make sure that they know, like, here's another way that you could be involved in providing access to care and to resources and to all the things that humans need for flourishing, for those that live in much less privileged places. And so that would be one. And we do, because we are faith-based, we do speak in churches and let people know in churches that this is an opportunity to really serve some of the most vulnerable people and some of the poorest. And then we also do partner with some foundations for grant funding as well. The bulk, like I said, is individual donors, but then we do have some like project grants for specific projects through foundations.
And so when you're speaking at churches, are you using that as a platform for getting in front of other individuals, or partnering with the churches directly?
Both. Yeah, both. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we do actually have churches as a whole that do partner with us as well. Yeah. And we're actually rolling out a new program. We just spent all morning actually working on the development of the program for some direct church partnership opportunities that would be a little bit more hands-on and a little bit more direct for the church, where it's not just sort of like we write a check out of our missions fund or whatever every, so often, but that we can really sort of adopt a project and partner directly with a local church in another area that would then equip them to do better access for people with disabilities in their own community, but they're working together on it. So we're just putting that program together as well.
Yeah, it seems like that would be fruitful, because when someone can get involved personally, a group of people from a church can get involved and, let's say, go on a mission trip to whatever you might call it. They're going on a trip together from the church with your organization to see, what's going on firsthand, see how you're caring for these individuals.
Yeah.
And the impact is going to be so much greater, from those individuals and then in the church.
And their understanding is so much greater if they've had the opportunity to really be firsthand, with people. So,
I think that would be a great activity.
Yeah, we do. So we have the opportunity just sort of on one-off if people are interested, but then now we're kind of trying to formalize that a little bit more in this partnership program, where a specific church can partner with a specific church to really, spread that inclusion message in their own area so that it's a little bit more targeted. Yeah.
So your current model as it is today, how are you thinking about evolving that? Well, I mean, you were giving one example there of these possibly, having churches be more direct partnership. Is there any other way that you're thinking about strategic partners differently as you move through in this next year?
Yeah, we are. We actually have a meeting coming up next week with a large, I don't know if they would call themselves a foundation. Maybe they would, but it's a philanthropic group, an investment group, actually. It started as an investment group and then, sort of moved into philanthropy in South Africa. And they have a conglomerate of organizations across Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, that they work with directly in all different sorts of things. A lot of economic empowerment types of programs. They're really pretty intent on building, alleviating poverty through economic development. And then also things like education and the things that support economic development, right? So healthcare and education and water and sanitation and that sort of thing. So they have a whole network of organizations that are part of their sort of, family of organizations, if you would. And we're actually meeting with them. We've been in conversation with them for about 6 months now, but having our sort of last formal meeting to sort of pitch this potential partnership in working with them to offer sort of our consultancy and expertise around disability and inclusion to all of their partners. So through training, through maybe direct partnership with some of their partner organizations, where we would work specifically with that particular organization to strategize and train their leadership on a worldview shift on disability and then disability inclusion in their particular context, whatever that might be, and then help them sort of tweak their strategic plans so that it is more inclusive of people with disabilities, thereby then including people with disabilities into all of these already existing organizations that are doing really good work and serving people across the continent. But then just sort of elevating what they're doing to make sure that it's including the most vulnerable and the people that are maybe not quite as visible to them as the rest of their population. So that's one way that we're looking at trying to sort of spread the impact and accomplish the mission, but sort of through the avenue of other organizations that are already on the ground doing so many good things.
Yeah, that sounds like a true strategic partnership relationship where, it's not, the other ones we're talking about are our strategic partners, but this one being almost a third party to everyone that's involved. And I like that too, because the impact can be greater for the base of people you're serving, but it also can be greater volume wise to get recognition and visibility to what you're doing and what they're doing globally. Yeah, that's great. Well, I'll kind of end on this question. If you were talking to a room of business owners and even people running nonprofits, what advice would you give them for building strong relationships with strategic partners?
I feel like this is an area that I am constantly learning in and would by no means consider myself an expert.
Well, aren't we all?
Yeah. And so if somebody asked me for advice, I'd probably flip the question on them, honestly, and just say, tell me a little bit about what you do, and hope that, I would learn something from them and we could maybe mutually help each other. Because I don't feel like I'm an expert by any means. I do think that one thing that we as an organization hold quite strongly as one of our core values is just the idea that we're all in this together. And so to sort of let go of the nonprofit world, probably the business world too, I don't know, that's not my world, but is highly competitive and territorial. And so we really push back against that as intentionally as we can, to just say, like, we want to help you serve people with disabilities, right? Like we're not saying, hey, we're the people that serve people with disabilities, back off.
Yeah.
But really just how can we resource you, right? Here's what we have to offer. And if it is helpful to you, then by all means, please utilize it, right? So I personally think that just really being open-handed with what we have, the resources that we have, the expertise that we have, I will say this is one I'm having trouble balancing, because like I get people that are like, well, you got to make people pay for that expertise, and then part of me is like, yeah, but we just want to see people with disabilities served well, right? And so if this group over here maybe can't afford to buy that expertise through consultancy or whatever, then great, I'll just give it to you. Like, I just want you doing the thing, right? So there's a balance in that. And I think because we're a nonprofit, we maybe have the ability to do that a little bit better, easier. But because people are always saying, yeah, but that could be a different income stream. And that's true.
Yeah.
But then also that might be a barrier, to really seeing other people with disabilities served well, which is what we're passionate about. So those are some of the wrestles, I think. I don't know if this is advice, but it's certainly things that I would want to wrestle with someone else. Like what do you have that you can make available to other people that would serve them well and actually serve your mission? Like if our mission is to see people with disabilities live transformed lives, then like if that happens through this organization over here, great, that still happened, right? Like that's what we want to see. So I think for whether it's a business, a nonprofit, for-profit or a nonprofit business, just to be more open-handed and less territorial. That's my encouragement to really everybody. I know that's not a popular business sort of mantra, but no, I think it's important, and I think we'll all do better, if we do just really see ourselves as all working towards the same things, the flourishing of humanity, in whatever way that is that we've been sort of, what we're the space that we're given to occupy in that space.
Well, talking about being a resource, I believe is the key. And the reason why I will bring on people who run nonprofits occasionally to my podcast is because I really think that business owners, founders, CEOs, whomever that's running these companies, they need to learn from the nonprofit world. They need to learn that, if they could think a little bit more like a nonprofit, they probably would make bigger strides. And it's a hard thing to do because, when you're a for-profit business, you're about writing new business and increasing revenue and increasing profit. These are the main things on your mind. And, the big companies that we see that just do really well by their shareholders and their customers, they tend to have this mentality that a lot of nonprofit directors or executive directors have. And that is where, hey, we are all in it for the greater good. We're in it for the good of the base of people we're here to serve. And it's, there are contracts involved and there's business involved, but we're ultimately, if our job is successful, if we can bring one more person to this step of, completion. And so I think that if more company founders, owners can think like a nonprofit in terms of being a resource and kind of almost like holding what they have with more of an open hand, I think that their success may not come quicker, but I think it would be so much deeper.
Yeah, deeper and more sustainable.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it really is the difference between having a scarcity mindset where you're competing for the resources all the time and an abundance mindset that says there's enough for all of us, and we should, if we do this together, we will actually go farther, right? Like the African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together, right? And I think that that's kind of what you're saying, is that that there's a deeper success and a more sustainable success when we really are working together and have a more generous mindset.
That's very well said.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm always, honored to bring people from the nonprofit world in and kind of enlighten some of us on the for-profit side into what's going on. So I appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you. I've really appreciated being here. It's been a good conversation.
So we want to send people your way. Where do we send people to get in contact with you?
Yeah, people can contact me directly if they'd like to have a conversation. My email is just my name, Kim Kargbo at ahint, AHINT, accessiblehopeinternational.org, or our website, which is accessiblehope.org.
That's great. Thanks, Kim.
Yeah, thank you, Lee.